Matthew, how's it going? It's good morning for me. It's good afternoon for you, I suppose, in London. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Eric. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm good. When I left a couple weeks ago, London, it was getting quite hot. How is the weather currently?
Well, in Europe, in Southern Europe, it is unbelievably hot, apparently. But it's I'm looking out on a rainy, cool London, basically autumnal for you guys.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting when I went to London, that kind of weather, and I got very hot instead.
Yeah, we do that as well.
What do you find yourself working on these days? What's at the forefront of the work?
Well, I run the Old Vic Theatre, so we are mostly what I'm doing at the moment is planning the next year or 2 years, in fact, of work there. I'm keeping an eye on Groundhog Day, which is on stage at the Old Vic at the moment, and it's halfway through its run. I'm reading scripts, a lot of scripts, some screenplays, um, looking after the kids who are getting ready for their summer vacation time and all of that stuff. So juggling.
Yeah, yeah. Groundhog Day recently had press night, which is kind of the last time that you're able to tinker with it after previews. Are you have I've heard it attributed to you as a quote that art is just what you make in the time that you had to make it. Uh, are you happy with where this iteration of Groundhog Day ended up and where it is right now?
Yes, I don't know whether I would say that about art, but I would certainly say a production is a document of where you got to and the amount of time you had and the amount of resources you had. And inevitably, there are things that I could fiddle with, carry on fiddling with. I mean,
Mm.
the great thing about having Groundhog Day on in the Old Vic Theatre where I'm based is that I can go downstairs and watch a performance or a bit of a performance, scribble a few notes, and some of those things, can be fixed or changed, modified. As the joy of live performances as opposed to movies is that you can keep molding it a little bit. But no, I'm very happy. I think I've rarely been more happy with where we've got to, but partly that's because we did it, or this is the third time we've done Groundhog Day. We did it at the Old Vic about 7 years ago, and we took it to Broadway and did some upgrades then. And so this is the third incarnation and has had time to really step back and think about what to do, um, what to do differently. It's a very, very complicated show, complex show,
Yeah.
surprisingly complex. And this version now is about me selecting, well, us, Tim and Danny, the writers as well, the three of us sort of selecting out what our favorite complexities are and getting rid of the least useful complexities. So I think this is a slightly more straightforward version of the story and is more, I think, emotionally effective for it.
Mm. Have you found the actors, Andy especially, being the one that has been through all the iterations of it? Have you found them reacting to those changes differently? Does it make their performance different?
Yeah, well, I mean, on a technical level, the original production at the Old Vic and on Broadway had five interconnected turntables, and so anybody performing on that stage was having to deal with the floor literally moving under their feet a lot of the time, and we were locked into the, the sort of engineering of that. The pace that it would go had been set to go at different times. And so Andy, given that his character, Andy Cole, plays Phil Connors, and that character really doesn't leave the stage. So he would have the full 2 hour, 20-minute ride on that floor and still have to perform. All of those have gone. There's no revolves anymore. So it's the floor is a known entity, and you know where you are at any given moment. So I
Sure.
think that's made it a lot easier in a way, and easier to deliver certain things. The choreography is much easier to deliver when the floor isn't moving, and there's been new choreography for this version. So I think and also just small changes, a couple of small lyric changes, little changes to lines in scenes, um, to accentuate the point, the emotional beats, and the point it wanted to make.
Yeah,
He's been very happy. I think we've all been really happy coming back to it because we loved it. To be honest, we loved it before, and the audience also were very happy with it before. So it's not like it needed fixing necessarily. It's just an opportunity to refine it, I guess.
sure, sure. I think the lyric that I wanted to ask you about that I've noticed has changed the most through all the iterations is in Stuck. The type of animal foreskin seems to be the lyric that has changed the
Yeah.
most.
Yeah. Well, that's just to leave Tim alone for a few minutes with a foreskin joke and he'll come up with another hat on a hat. But yes, that I can't claim any credit for that. That's purely him.
Yeah. I was able to see Groundhog Day in New York, and it was during one of Andy Carl's infamous knee brace shows after he had hurt his knee. And now seeing him in London, it was different. His performance was different to me. And I don't know if it and better, absolutely brilliant. He felt to me lighter or more eased into the role. I don't know how to describe it on my end. Have you noticed a change? Is he just settling into the role after doing it so long? What have you noticed on your end?
Yeah, well, it's quite fascinating this because isn't there some theory about all of our cells get replaced every 7 years? By 7 years, that we're not, none of us are the same physical being that we were before, and that's the period of time it's been. Um, I can't put my finger on what's different. He really, um, some people have said to me, I love the changes you've made. I love how it's darker and more emotional.
Mm,
And you just said something was lighter, which is what I've also heard.
yeah,
So I think that people's memory also is a big component in
sure,
this,
sure.
and what where you were at when you encountered it
Yeah,
first time, where you're at now. So there's a lot of variables involved. Um, I think that, and a lot has happened to all of us. Let's face it, in the interim,
yeah,
and so yeah, I love how Andy is. He's always been brilliant and continues to be brilliant at combining sort of bravura showmanship and physical comedy with sort of tenderness, really, and emotional depth. And he's really enjoyed those parts of Groundhog Day that are that go into a deeper place, deeper than the audience expects. I
yeah,
think maybe he's relishing that a little more this time. But like I say, I think it's what we've done in stripping away some of the complexity makes it easier for a straight line of connection to happen between a performer and an audience
yeah.
without it being distracting or blurry at all.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, I hadn't. That's funny. I hadn't considered that. To be fair, Tim inexplicably gave me a ticket to press night. I think to the chagrin of his management, who was trying to bump me off that list for the last month before the show. I was by far the least important person in that room, and I think maybe I was feeling euphoric. So
that's
maybe that impacted my
that's
opinion.
good. Yeah.
Take me back to as far back as you want to go or can remember in your life. When did story, theater, directing, when did all that start to bubble up for you in your life?
Wow. Um, well, my father had been an actor up until when I was conceived, and I was the third child, and I think he felt, as I understand it, that as a career was very unreliable. It wasn't a very sort of responsible parental job to be,
Sure.
and that and plus various other reasons. He took himself off to theological college and trained as a vicar when I was conceived. So I then grew up in a vicarage, but one in a vicarage which knew quite a lot about theatre. Uh,
Interesting.
And also, I grew up in the kind of middle of nowhere in Yorkshire, in a village in quite a plain village with a big power station and not no rolling hills and little streams and bucolic vistas. Um, but and 25 miles from a theatre or a cinema or anything like that. So I was a little bit culturally deprived compared to my kids who are growing up in London and everything's here. But nevertheless, the conversations and the sort of background vibe in the house was theaterish. And I asked for and got for a present when I was very young a toy theatre, a empty stage basically, and I used to make cardboard cutouts and make scenery, and then Lego introduced these little lights that you could put on the front of a Lego
Yeah,
car and train. And I took those lights out and I put them inside my theatre, my toy theatre. So
that's
this is probably about the age of about 7 or 8. I was doing that. And also my dad still had at home his old makeup box from when he was an actor. An actor, makeup was a big deal back in those days. I'm talking about the 50s and 60s in acting. And so he had nose putty to make false nose, false hair, and glue to glue it on, and all of the face paints and stuff. And I used to play with that. I used to get that out and to make myself into an old man with a grey beard and wander around the house for no reason. So, and then I got into youth theatre, and quite soon into local youth theatre, and I got into being a leader as well as being a participant in that. So I would help run drama workshops for 6 and 7 year olds when I was 12, 13, and eventually got into the National Youth Theatre, which was London based, as an actor when I was about 17, 18, 19. Went to university and studied music with drama there, did quite a lot of acting there, but also began to direct. And when I left university, I didn't have a plan, but one of the things I thought about being was a conductor or an actor, and director was just sort of there, not really knowing what it meant,
yeah,
on
sure.
the list, and I sort of tumbled into it.
You've gone in the direction of stage plays, musicals. You've directed film. Do you have a preference?
I feel really fortunate and relieved that I've been able to switch it up some as much as I have and change between. I because what happens, of course, doing one gives you an appetite for the other,
Yeah,
and you miss it, and so you go back to a musical or back to a play or back to a film with a renewed vigor and enthusiasm because you haven't been stuck doing that for a while. And there's different things that appeal. The quietness of doing a play, the sort of rational process of just simply meeting up every day and working it out and putting it on without the craziness of huge amounts of equipment or huge expense most of the time. And it's it's just the detective process of exploring a text
yeah.
and then building a production is very human. It's on a human scale.
Mhm.
um Musicals, obviously, what appeals to me about musicals is the collaboration. I love the fact that I don't have to be on the front line every minute of the process because I can step back and watch choreography happening or songs being taught by the music department and have a storyteller's view on how to make the most of those bits of choreography, but it's
Yeah,
not me right there. So it feels like you can relax for a few minutes of each day when you're doing a musical, funnily enough. And then also I love trying to create fusion out of disparate elements. That's one of the things I really enjoy because the outcome is so much greater than the sum of the parts and
yeah.
greater than any individual sort of uh role. could deliver.
Sure.
And that's particularly strong in musicals, but it's at its strongest in filmmaking when there are thousands of people working, and you, as a director, you need to make sure everyone's working to one end, and
Yeah.
that this fusion, you hope this fusion will happen. And the permanence of what you're doing with film,
Yeah.
opposed to theatre, is also very, you know, it's tough when your mistakes get printed, but on the other hand, it's you don't feel you have to say to somebody, I wish you'd seen my production of whatever it was on stage years ago, because we just produce a DVD or a link.
Sure.
And
Sure. Yeah, the collaboration is interesting to me because you've worked with some brilliant people alongside you in collaboration, and people that, at least I know from Tim's standpoint, has very strong convictions and isn't afraid to fight for what he thinks is right in story and stuff. What has it been like in those situations where there's disagreements, when there's different points of view? How do you resolve those?
Hmm. I mean, generally speaking, I go into a process um, um, hoping that I will be encountering better ideas than
Mm,
the ones I've had
mhm.
so far, and identifying, there's a part of directing which is simply identifying the best idea in the room, and it might be yours. It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
and uh, and you have to be alert to it. And so I really like that. It's a disappointing thing. Something's gone wrong when you go into a process and you're having to do everything and you're having to solve everything. Because it's disappoint feels disappointing, and it makes me feel sort of self-conscious because I know there's something better that I haven't thought of a lot of the time. And when somebody gives you, even if somebody gives you half a better idea, it's often quite easy to complete that half and make a whole out of it. And that's the exciting thing, is not when there's a solution that comes from one person, but when it's a combined effort to solve it, and everyone pounces on the germ of an idea, and bang, 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 suddenly it's there. And so I love that side of it, and that's when everything's functioning properly. Part of that is arguing. If you disagree with people that you respect, um, then the argument is also fascinating,
Mm,
and you kind of really grow, I think, when
mm,
you're having those differences of opinion.
yeah.
But um, I mean, in particular, you're referring to Tim Minchin, and we're wildly different people. It's uncanny how much our tastes coincide. I mean, they really coincide a lot, and um, so and if he's wandering around right now hating chunks of my on Matilda and Groundhog Day, he's certainly kept it to himself admirably. I think he would do, if he was directing, he would do different. I mean, it's different with him. He's so multi-talented. He can direct.
Yeah.
I can't write songs, so it's like I can't say I would have written that differently. You can say I would have directed that differently, I guess. But no, I think it's a bit like, I'm not really a sporty person, but um I imagine in a tennis match, if you get a really impressive even in a rally of volleying or something like that, and a really hard um ball comes towards you, and it makes you physically do something and reach that you couldn't possibly have done if the ball hadn't been traveling at that speed and at
Sure.
that angle. And so your response becomes better because
Right.
of the hardness or the difficulty of what's coming at you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Let's jump to Matilda, the movie. As a fan of the stage play, I'll admit I was a little nervous hearing that a movie was coming out, because the history of Broadway to film is an iffy history at best. Maybe 50-50, good films to not good films. Was there conversations about choosing whether to do a pro shot versus a film adaptation? What were those conversations like? How did you land on a film adaptation and decide to go forward with that?
What was the alternative you said?
A pro shot, like, yeah,
What's that?
maybe that's the American term. I don't know. Just filming the stage adaptation,
Oh, right.
a la Disney Plus Hamilton. You know, that sort of.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Um, no, that conversation didn't happen.
Mm,
Um, and you know, I when I was first in rehearsals for Matilda, and this happens a lot when I rehearse, um, the very first time we're in the rehearsals, we're doing a scene, and I find myself talking to an actor, kind of fleshing out the situation for them a bit more and saying, so imagine you're looking out of that window and what you see is, and I
mm,
describe essentially the film version
sure.
of what, I'm talking about. And we discover something to cling on to when you're playing the scene is that image that's not actually on the stage, but it helps. And or I might say, imagine, I suppose Matilda's journey to school this morning would have gone a bit like this. We don't see any of that in the show. So I had in my mind, and like I say, this often happens when I'm doing a play or a show. I have a bigger the bigger world of that thing in my head, the kind of world that would appear in a film, in my head in bits and pieces. And I even for Matilda, I even had a little notebook where I scribbled some things in, and sort of saying to myself, I don't know what I was saying. I couldn't possibly have anticipated that it would be successful enough to have a film, but in a film, this might happen. So I got a piece of paper somewhere that's got a scribbled drawing of Matilda riding with Mrs. Phelps on the back of an elephant heading into a circus tent. And in the end, in the film, we didn't have the elephant, that got cut, but they walk into the tent. But the idea of that they are in that circus world, which is something that happens in the film version much more than the stage version, was already there. So, and then what happened was it became a success on stage, and people started seriously talking about that. But the Royal Shakespeare Company introduced a holdback, which meant we couldn't make the film for I don't know what it was, like 6 years, or it felt like a really long time.
Mm,
And then COVID happened. It turned into even a longer gap. Well, I attribute that to being the key to, don't want to say the success of the film, but the fact that the film is its own thing, properly its own thing.
mm,
Because when you're making a show for the stage, inevitably you just become one track mind. You become sort of obsessed with what you've got, and
yeah.
that your relationship with that production stays intact for a long time, and it's got a half-life of probably about 4 years or something. And so by the time we actually got around, Dennis Kelly and myself and Tim, to actually thinking about properly doing the film, and it started with Dennis, starting on a screenplay, we were a long way away from, we were different people. Talk about the 7 year, we were two other people, but further on than we had been, versions of ourselves. And we weren't, it's no coincidence that some of the best film adaptations have probably been directed by people who didn't do the stage version.
mm,
And I think in lots of ways it's because you need a different brain and different. But
interesting.
what I'm saying is that we had that.
You
We
had
we
this.
all had a different brain on it by then.
Yeah.
And
Did it make
we
it
could,
easier? Did it make it easier to cut things? Because you had to cut a lot.
yeah,
Did those things feel less precious than they would have 5 years earlier?
yeah. So going into shooting, everything that we'd cut and changed, we were all happy with that. It was a good choice for the film. However, in post-production, we ended up cutting, as you would expect, we ended up cutting things that we'd actually shot and that we'd intended to be in the film. And that wasn't so enjoyable because they were really good. There was, 3 songs that were really, really great. And they're just on the cutting room floor at the moment. So that side of things, not so much.
Will we ever see them? Will there ever be a special release where we get it's loud, it's telly, and it's knock on the door? Are those will we
Yeah.
ever see them?
I don't really know how it works. It's sort of in the olden days, I could imagine it somehow being a director's cut. I don't know how it works these days.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think the flow of the film benefits from not having to hang around for those songs in the actual moment. But the character, the depth, the deepening of the character and the information about character and situation is that those songs provide is really rich. So it's flow versus depth and richness is the trade-off. And people have this funny relationship with the running time now as well, overall running time. On the one hand, they'll watch a 3-hour Marvel film, but then someone will tell you, better get under 2 hours. I think my contract said under 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I hope people see them because Lashana's version Knock on the Door and Andrea's version of Loud is the other one.
Yeah.
And the Andrea's version of Loud, both of them are absolutely brilliant. And actually, Telly was shot against a green screen, and we were going to put lots of crazy things behind it. Sure. And that was intended to go in the end credits. And so all we've got is the footage of that song against a green screen. So it needs finishing. Whereas Loud and Knock on the Door were finished and wonderful. Yeah.
Right. Let's go back to Groundhog Day just a little bit. What can you share in terms of its life now, where it's going, what the hopes and dreams of it are, and really also, what did you learn from the first time around that maybe you're doing differently this time around?
Well, I mean, now that we don't have the revolves in Groundhog Day and the turntables, we've got something which is tourable and portable and mobile, which we never had before. So that thinking there was, if there is the demand for future life, we don't want to be hamstrung by our own physical production. Sure. So we are free to take up opportunities now for future life. And thankfully, since we opened at the Old Vic, we've had a lot of approaches. And I don't know when is this podcast going out, but anyway, a couple of weeks' time. Probably by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know a little bit more about exactly what's going to happen. And, theatre availability in, just like on Broadway, but in the West End is it's a very crowded market. There are several shows stacking up, waiting for every theatre to come available. And you just have to hope you get to the front of the queue for some of those. And but it is a show, like I say, that can tour now and play other territories, and it's intended to. And the conversations are really alive at the moment. So from where I'm sort of standing at the moment, I think there will be some more Groundhog Day, and I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah.
And I suppose, one of the things, what have we learned? I mean, 1,000 tiny things that are irrelevant to discuss. Big things. A couple of big things, I suppose. One is that the more Groundhog Day plays different people, the more I hear people say, I didn't expect it to be so good.
Yeah.
And even though people love the film, I think the idea of a musical of Groundhog Day sounds a little bit for
Yeah.
some people. Is it just going to be like repetition, or
Right.
what's it going to be, or is it just going to be exploitative? And why mess with something that's great on film? So, and it's nice to be told that it's better than people thought, but also it makes you realize, I guess that could be a contributing factor to it not finding its audience on Broadway, is because it needed to maybe hang around
Yeah.
long enough to push through that understandable, perhaps, prejudice against it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I mean, it's a timing thing too, right? Broadway was pretty crowded when it moved in. It seemed like Come From Away, Josh Groban and Great Comet, Ben Platt and Dear Evan Hansen already had a momentum going at
They
that time.
certainly
Not to
did.
mention they
Yeah.
were all on the same city block and kind of advertised each other. And still the afterglow of Hamilton, probably. That
Mm.
you're right. That thing of what is this Groundhog Day thing? Maybe
Mm.
just didn't have a chance to get going.
Yeah, I
Whereas
think
if you guys had come a year later, it would have been going up against SpongeBob SquarePants
right.
in that sense,
But
So it had to have been a timing thing too.
we'd have had a chance. I think also remember, let's not forget Groundhog Day is only ever used in a negative connotation as a phrase.
Oh, interesting.
So it's
Yeah.
a bit like something being called boredom or stuck. Um,
I never considered
so
that. That's interesting.
yeah, and so yeah, pushing through that a little bit. And then the other thing people said to me is, I'm not sure you can bring it back, Matthew, in this day and age, culturally. Um, a person behaving badly like that all the time, the audience won't want to see that. And enough people said that to make me um worry a little bit about it. And but when we got this version on the Old Vic, and from first preview onwards, and where the laughter was, and where the tears, and where the scale of emotion that the audience was expressing and feeling, I was reassured straight away that it's actually a perfect time to be telling a story about, um, although it's ultimately about mercy, about how we could look at human beings and even the worst behaved people. What this fantasy is about, is how there's a potential for good and in everybody, and with and second chances and reform being what it's about,
Yeah.
as opposed to cancellation or whatever. So I think it feels weirdly topical, and quite a lot of people have said to me it was very uplifting at this particular time when the world seems to be crazy and there seems to be so many bad things happening. It's a show which is full. It's a story which is full of hope, for the best and for better, for potential for good. And even though it's a fantasy, I think, like a parable, that is a sort of it's got healing potential, and so it seems like a good time. People who said it's a bad time for this story, I think they were wrong.
Mm, that's awesome. I have been bragging about it around Los Angeles for so long that I hope by the time this podcast releases, I get to tell people they can go see it soon.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears in the time that we have left. A big part of this podcast has been me trying to see different perspectives, not just um, the Christian faith that I was brought up in. It seems to me that your dad going off to train as a vicar means that you grew up in a religious household. What has religion been to you over the course of your life, and growing up in a house like that, and moving on? What has that meant to you?
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's a kind of a hybrid upbringing, in that it was partly religious and part theatrical,
Sure.
which are worlds that have historically entwined themselves.
Mm.
Um, for to some people's surprise, but I think it's sort of obvious in a way, the overlap. And I think that just you know, growing up believing that we're supposed to leave the world better than how we found it, and that there's things that you can do to help people, and that stories are one of those things. And you can learn lessons. And I think the main thing I would say is groups of people coming together, group of people coming together in a church, singing together, hearing music, having a sort of listening to stories or text, um, and thinking together as a group, thinking and feeling together as a group. These are the things that I was marinated in every Sunday,
Mm.
and um, and also the heightened atmosphere of a church, the light, the the smell, the costumes, the colors, the music, and the willingness of the people, the eagerness of the people, the open-heartedness of the people being there, and gathering and stopping doing everything else that they're doing just to focus. So we get all of those things in theatre for sure, and I'm very aware of it. I'm also very aware of how weird it is for a lot of people, the idea of stepping into a church and how they'd much more comfortably walk straight past it,
Mm.
and they don't really know what happens in there. And I think the same thing about theatres. People, most people walk past theatres and they must think just weird stuff is happening in there. They wouldn't know what to do if they went in. When do you sit? When do you clap? What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, interesting.
And and so I'm very conscious at the Old Vic of trying to keep our doors open and just bring people in, just the way that my dad and the evangelical movement of the 70s and stuff would be out on the streets trying to bring people in, try to demystify and make that experience more informal.
Mm.
So both of them are potentially quite formal activities that I think we would benefit from informality a bit.
Yeah.
Um, um,
Well,
but I,
be fair to
yeah,
people, to be fair to people, what happens on with Christianity outside of its doors, I don't think is very inviting. That would draw people in
yeah,
its doors. You know what I'm saying? I'm
yeah,
not
I
sure
do.
that Christianity has the best view in the public based on what's being put out, and plenty of things
Yeah,
to blame about that. But
no, well, of course, I agree, and I find that fundamentalism is very disconcerting in all forms,
sure,
and um, my father's a very mild man, and and I think doubt, mildness, open-mindedness are very reassuring things, and I find certainty and fundamentalism very suspect and worrying
yeah.
and intimidating, actually.
Mhm.
So um, when I did the film Pride, one of my real disappointments was my father died just before I never got to see it. But
Mm.
I did a dedication at the end to my dad, who taught me comedy and compassion, and he was a very funny man and very compassionate man. I think compassion in all its forms is um, surprisingly hard, surprisingly challenging. It's
Yeah,
not like people like, oh, be nice, be kind and stuff. Actually, it's really not easy to be kind as is necessary sometimes. And so it's quite a radical idea, compassion. And when that's at the heart of a philosophy or an ideology, I think that's a good sign. But when fundamentalism and intolerance is a key feature, that's a very off-putting thing.
yeah. These projects, these musicals that we've been talking about, have deep underlying truths to them. Uh,
Mhm.
that seems to be an important part of your work, what you want to put out into the world. Where does that is that come from, that upbringing of experiencing those truths? Is that part of just who you are now? Why is that an important part of the work that you make?
Yeah, I think it's always been, and I think probably because of growing up in a church, I sort of associate the idea of um a message of truth or and inspiration to be an important component part. Somebody said to me in an interview just recently, and they said this thing, and I actually started crying. It sounds like a very showy offy thing to report to you. I apologize for that in advance. The interviewer said, the I don't know any other director that does joy like you, Matthew.
Mm.
And 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 I welled up immediately. I kind of like, and I thought, well, that is actually, I don't think I set out to try and do that, but I definitely recognize what you've just said. Because there is strife in thinking because I've just said it, Pride, and in Matilda, and in Groundhog Day, and real darkness and pain in all of them. But it's there in order to set up the joy at the end and create a real sense of triumph over against the odds at the end. And I'm, as a person, Tim will tell you, I'm a relatively dour, however you want to pronounce it, slightly gloomy person who loves comedy. And I'm a bit of a pessimist, but I really believe in redemption, and I tell stories full of joy. So the sort of like the dark and the light are definitely in me, and I like them to be in the stories I do. And I suppose that's why I really get on with Tim. You know, Tim is he's such a I don't know, crusader for wisdom and enlightenment, and he's very funny and very serious in his intentions as well.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in Tim's lyrics. There's a lot of wisdom in Danny Rubin's story and in Dennis Kelly's version of Matilda.
Yeah.
And I love that that is combined. There's a lot of compassion in there. And like I say, that mixed with comedy and joy and fun
Yeah.
is a great mixture for me.
Yeah. You don't have to talk about specifics of things that are coming up, but what moving forward in your career, what kind of stories are you interested in telling? What are you looking for in terms of stories that you'd like to tell the rest of your career?
Mm. Well, I did a lot very early on, and um, I've got half of me is waiting for somebody to tell me it's okay, you can stop now, Matthew. So I don't feel like I've got 20 more years and 30 more productions left in me, which makes me a bit more selective, I suppose.
Sure.
And when I um, first met Stephen Beresford, who's the writer of Pride, and because he'd sent me the script, and we had our first meeting, the first thing I said to him was, you know, the older I get, Stephen, the less I see the point of tragedy. And we had a good laugh about it. And he said he felt the same way. And I was talking about that's why I loved his script. And however, one of the things, so I don't do much tragedy anymore. And I know there's a point of tragedy. It's a teaching point, a lesson point, a warning. One of the projects I'm looking forward to doing soon is a big dance and text sort of mashup of Oedipus. So I'll be right in, my head will be right in tragedy.
Mm.
And I don't know what that's going to feel like because I haven't done that for a long time. And that's for the stage. And I'm excited about that and the particular collaboration that's planned for that. I'm looking at other films. I've deliberately not picked another film yet because I wanted to step back and have a breather. And I was really worn down actually by making Matilda, in not least because of the COVID protocols and
Sure,
all of
sure.
that stuff. So I'm waiting to kind of like bounce back and be ready again, but I will be ready. and we'll pick something soon. And in the meantime, running the Old Vic is quite a creative thing, even when I'm not directing, because putting together a director and a writer and a designer and overseeing those things is a bit like putting together a production. So I get some of my creative juices get fulfilled there, but I have got a couple of other musicals in development, and Tim and I are determined to find our next project soon. We're working
Yes,
hard to try
yes,
and find it.
make it happen.
Mhm.
I'm so thrilled that you were willing to do this. We got to meet for about 2 minutes in London at the after party of Groundhog Day, and I left going, I wanted to talk to him for an hour. So I'm so thrilled that you were willing to do it. I do have one more question, that's just a selfish question for myself. I think it's funny in art, you put something out there and then people get to interpret it. And sometimes they're wrong. And I had a funny moment with Tim because to me in Matilda, there's a scene where Matilda and Bruce's hands slip when the Trunchbull is pulling, which is a precursor to the acrobat and the escapologist's hand slipping in her story, right?
Yeah.
So I said to Tim, there's like those are very those are very vivid images to me when they happened in the film. And then at the end, during the song, Still Holding Hands, there's a shot of them laying head to toe, and they're holding hands. And it looks like the exact same shot as the hand slipping before. So I said to Tim, it's so brilliant that with this theme of slipping hands that you wrote a song, they finally found people to hold hands with, and they're still holding hands. And he had no idea what I was talking about. And he was like, that's not why I wrote the song at all. Did I imagine that, or did you film it that way? Is there something there that I actually saw, or did I completely make that up?
I think I can remember the answer to the question. Probably quite boring. The idea of Matilda and Bruce's hands slipping after the chocolate cake scene, he's been taken to Chokey. I had that idea when we were still developing the script, and I asked Dennis to write it into the script in pre-production. I can't remember whether Tim had already written the new song by then or not, but I think he had already written the new song by the time that went into the script. And I don't remember putting it into the script because of the song. But by the time I shot the last scene, which was quite late in the shoot, of the two of them on top of the caravan
Yeah.
with the end like that, I had shot all of the other hand shots, and I made sure that there was an echo there and resonance. And actually, it has to be said, there are along the way, um, this is so obvious it sounds dumb, but when I was shooting Pride, which is about these two different opposing groups coming together, I went out of my way to get bridges into as many shots as possible. And to feature them. Of course, one of the last scenes is the very last scene takes place on a bridge as well. With Matilda, I went out of my way to get doors slamming and closing, this idea of being trapped and being then broken through, and also hand holding. So there are lots more shots, there are several more shots of hands being held and
Yeah.
separated and things in the film than I actually used in the end. I just sort of loaded my shopping basket with as many opportunities, and during editing thought this might be overkill.
Okay,
So we
good,
picked
good.
it back.
Because I felt quite dumb when I said that to Tim, and he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, Matthew, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it so much. Whatever you do next, I'm super pumped for it. Thanks for doing this, man.
Great. Good to talk to you, Eric.